Judge Harold Mitchell had seen everything in his 23 years on the bench, or so he thought. Child custody battles, bitter divorces, abuse allegations that made his stomach turn. He'd presided over them all with the same measured composure that had earned him respect throughout Chicago's family court system. But nothing in his decorated career prepared him for what walked into Courtroom 4C that cold, gray October morning. The heavy oak doors creaked open, and time seemed to slow. 8-year-old Emma Torres entered, her small hand clutching the leather harness of a golden retriever with an intensity that made her knuckles bone white. The child moved like someone walking through a nightmare, each step deliberate and terrified, as if the floor beneath her might suddenly disappear. Her dark eyes, too old for such a young face, darted around the cavernous courtroom like a trapped animal desperately searching for escape routes she knew didn't exist. The gallery fell into an uncomfortable silence. Lawyers shuffled papers nervously. The court reporter's fingers hovered above her keyboard, waiting. Even the bailiff, a grizzled veteran named who'd seen decades of human misery parade through these halls, straightened in his chair, sensing something significant was about to unfold. Emma's foster mother, Williams, a kind-faced woman in her 50s with worry lines etched deep around her eyes, whispered gentle encouragement from the front row. "You're safe, sweetheart. We're right here. Biscuits with you." But her words seemed to evaporate before reaching the child. Emma remained frozen just inside the doorway, trembling like a leaf in a winter storm. On the opposite side of the courtroom, Torres sat rigidly at the defendant's table, his jaw clenched so tight the muscles visibly pulsed beneath his stubbled skin. He was 34 but looked older, worn down by something Judge Mitchell couldn't quite identify. Stress, guilt, anger. The man's eyes locked onto his daughter with an expression the judge had learned to recognize over the years, the look of someone who'd convinced themselves they were the victim in a story where they were actually the villain. His attorney, a sharply dressed woman named Winters with a reputation for aggressive defense tactics, leaned over and whispered something that made her client's shoulders relax slightly. Judge Mitchell noted the interaction with interest. Ms. Winters had built her career on technicalities and procedural objections. If she thought she could win this case, she had a strategy, and that made him cautious. Emma's caseworker, a social worker who'd advocated passionately for Emma's permanent removal from her father's custody, sat beside the foster parents. Her thick case file rested on her lap, packed with 6 months of documentation, medical reports, school records, and investigation notes. She told Judge Mitchell in chambers before the hearing, "Your Honor, this child hasn't spoken a single word since we removed her, not one syllable in 6 months. But she needs to tell her story, and somehow we have to listen." The court-appointed attorney for Emma, David, rose from his seat and gently approached the little girl. He was one of the good ones, a public defender who actually cared, who fought for children because he believed in justice, not because it paid well. "Emma," he said softly, kneeling to her eye level, "nobody here will hurt you, I promise. Can you come sit in the special chair? Biscuit can come with you." The golden retriever, wearing an official service vest with patches indicating psychiatric support certification, looked up at Emma with the kind of patient devotion only dogs seem capable of providing. The animal's brown eyes were intelligent, watchful, and completely attuned to the child beside him. Judge Mitchell noticed how the dog's breathing had slowed, how he pressed slightly against Emma's leg, subtle cues that suggested highly specialized training. Emma took one step forward, then another. Each movement looked like it required enormous courage. Her free hand twisted the fabric of her blue cardigan, a nervous habit that had clearly worn the material thin in places. She wore clean clothes, her hair was neatly braided, and someone had carefully painted her fingernails with child-safe polish in a cheerful pink. Williams had clearly been doing everything possible to help this traumatized child feel normal, safe, loved. The custody battle had been dragging through the system for months, ever since Child Protective Services had removed Emma from Torres' apartment following a neighbor's 911 call. The initial reports were disturbing. A child found alone repeatedly, signs of neglect, concerning behaviors at school. but had fought back hard, claiming he was a devoted single father victimized by an overzealous system. He'd passed drug tests, completed parenting classes, maintained steady employment, or so his documentation claimed. As Emma finally reached the witness stand, the bailiff brought over a booster seat to help her reach the microphone. The little girl climbed up with Biscuit staying glued to her side, never more than inches away. Once seated, Emma's hands immediately dove into the dog's thick golden fur, gripping tightly as if the animal were the only thing anchoring her to reality. Judge Mitchell leaned forward slightly, his reading glasses perched on his nose, studying the child before him. In his decades on the bench, he developed an instinct about people, a sixth sense about truth and deception that rarely failed him. Right now, every alarm in his body was ringing. This child was terrified, genuinely traumatized, and something about the way she couldn't even glance toward her father spoke volumes. "This court is now in session," Judge Mitchell announced, his deep voice filling the room with authority and, he hoped, reassurance. "We're here to determine what custody arrangement serves the best interests of Emma Torres. Ms., you may begin." David stood, approaching the witness stand with careful, non-threatening movements. "Emma," he began gently, "can you tell us what happened when you lived with your father?" The courtroom held its collective breath. Emma's lips trembled, her chest rose and fell rapidly, her hands gripped Biscuit's fur even. But no words came, only silence, heavy, painful, and screaming with everything the little girl couldn't say. Torres' attorney rose immediately, her voice sharp and dismissive. "Your Honor, the witness is clearly unable to provide testimony. I move to." But Judge Mitchell raised his hand, silencing her. His eyes remained fixed on Emma, on her hands, on the way her fingers were moving against Biscuit's head, deliberate, patterned movements that seemed too precise to be random nervous gestures. Behind Emma's right ear, 2 quick taps. Under the dog's chin, a gentle stroke. On Biscuit's shoulder, a firm press. And the dog responded, sitting, lying down, placing a paw on Emma's lap. Judge Mitchell's pulse quickened. His legal mind raced through possibilities while his instincts screamed that he was witnessing something extraordinary, something unprecedented. This wasn't just a child seeking comfort from her service animal. This was communication, deliberate, consistent, and desperate. And Judge Mitchell suddenly realized he was about to be part of something that would change everything he thought he knew about justice, testimony, and the lengths a traumatized child would go to finally, desperately, tell her truth. The question was, would he be brave enough to listen? David cleared his throat and tried again, his voice even softer than before. "Emma, sweetheart, can you tell us what happened when you lived with your father? Were you happy there?" The silence stretched like taffy, thin and uncomfortable, filling every corner of the courtroom. Emma's small chest heaved with rapid breaths, her eyes fixed on a spot somewhere on the floor, anywhere, but toward the defendant's table where Torres sat forward in his chair, his expression a carefully constructed mask of concerned fatherhood. But Judge Mitchell wasn't watching. His attention remained laser-focused on Emma and the peculiar dance her fingers were performing across Biscuit's golden fur. Tap, tap behind the dog's left ear, quick and deliberate. Biscuit immediately responded, sitting rigidly at attention and releasing a soft whine that seemed to echo Emma's distress. The dog's tail stopped wagging. His entire body tensed as if absorbing the child's anxiety through some invisible connection. "Emma," David pressed gently, "can you nod yes or no? Were you safe living with your dad?" Emma's hand moved again, this time a long, slow stroke under Biscuit's chin, her fingers trembling as they traced downward along the dog's throat. The golden retriever responded instantly, lowering himself into a down position, his body stretched flat against the floor, his head resting on his paws. Another whimper escaped him, this one more pronounced, more plaintive. Judge Mitchell's eyes narrowed. He'd been around countless service animals over the years, seeing-eye dogs, hearing assistance dogs, even a few emotional support animals in sensitive cases. But he'd never witnessed responses this specific, this choreographed. Every movement Emma made triggered an exact, predictable response from Biscuit. It was like watching a conversation in a language he didn't understand. "Your Honor," Winters stood abruptly, her designer heels clicking against the courtroom floor as she approached the bench. "This is highly irregular. The witness is non-responsive, and that animal is creating a disruption. My client has a right to face his accuser, but how can he defend himself against a child who won't or can't speak?" Torres nodded vigorously from his seat, his face flushing with what appeared to be righteous indignation. "This is ridiculous," he called out, his voice cracking with emotion that seemed just a touch too theatrical. "That's my daughter, I love her, and you're letting this circus make me look like a monster." "Mr. Torres, you will remain silent unless addressed directly," Judge Mitchell warned, his tone sharp. But even as he issued the reprimand, his gaze drifted back to Emma. The little girl had flinched at her father's outburst, her entire body recoiling as if struck. And her hand shot to Biscuit's shoulder with such force that the judge heard the soft thump even from the bench. The dog's reaction was immediate and protective. Biscuit surged upward from his down position, pressing his solid body against Emma's legs, creating a physical barrier between the child and the rest of the courtroom. His tail tucked, his ears flattened, and he released a low, rumbling sound, not quite a growl, but close enough to signal warning. Williams gasped from the gallery. The caseworker leaned forward with sudden intensity, her pen flying across her notepad. David exchanged a meaningful glance with the foster mother, something unspoken passing between them. Judge Mitchell's mind raced. 23 years of jurisprudence had taught him to trust patterns, and what he was witnessing was definitely a pattern. Each question about Emma's father triggered a specific signal. Each signal produced an exact response from the dog, and every single one of those responses seemed to correlate with emotional states: fear, distress, protection, danger. "Approach the bench," Judge Mitchell commanded, gesturing to both attorneys. Winters and David hurried forward, meeting at the base of his elevated platform. The judge leaned down, keeping his voice low enough that the microphones wouldn't capture his words. "What exactly am I looking at here?" he asked. "Is this child communicating through that dog?" David nodded eagerly. "Your Honor, Emma has been working with Dr. Sarah, a child psychologist specializing in trauma therapy. The dog isn't just for emotional support. He's been trained to help Emma communicate when her words fail her. She has selective mutism stemming from—" "Objection," Winters hissed, careful to keep her voice down. "This is completely inadmissible. There's no legal precedent for translating dog behaviors as testimony. This is junk science at best, manipulation at worst. The prosecution is trying to in statements that wouldn't meet any evidentiary standard." "The child has a right to be heard," David countered, his cheeks flushing with passion. "She's been trying to tell us something for 6 months, and we've been too bureaucratic, too rigid in our definitions of testimony to listen." Judge Mitchell held up his hand, silencing them both. His eyes returned to Emma, who sat hunched in the witness chair, her face buried in Biscuit's neck, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The dog had curved his body around her, his head resting across her lap, applying what appeared to be deliberate pressure, the kind of deep pressure therapy the judge had read about in articles on autism and anxiety treatment. "Is doctor available?" Judge Mitchell asked. "She's in the building, Your Honor," David confirmed. "We had her on standby in case." "Get her, now." The judge's tone left no room for argument. "Ms. Winters, you'll have your chance to cross-examine, but I want to understand what I'm seeing before I make any ruling on admissibility." Winters's jaw tightened, but she nodded curtly. She knew better than to push Judge Mitchell when he'd made up his mind to investigate something. The man had a reputation for being thorough to the point of obsession. As David hurried from the courtroom to fetch Doctor, Judge Mitchell called for a 15-minute recess. The gallery erupted in whispered conversations. Torres conferred intensely with his attorney, his gestures growing increasingly agitated. Williams rushed to the witness stand, wrapping Emma in a protective embrace while carefully avoiding disturbing Biscuit's position. Judge Mitchell retreated to his chambers, his mind spinning. He'd built his career on following the letter of the law, on precedent and procedure. But he'd also taken an oath to seek justice, especially for the most vulnerable. And if ever there was a vulnerable person in his courtroom, it was that terrified little girl with her service dog. His clerk, a woman who'd worked with him for 15 years, brought him coffee without being asked. "What are you thinking, Your Honor?" she asked quietly. "I'm thinking," Judge Mitchell said slowly, staring at the law books lining his walls, "that we're about to enter completely uncharted territory. And I'm thinking that little girl knows something important enough that she's found a way to communicate it despite being unable to speak. The father's lawyer will appeal anything you allow," warned. "Let her appeal." Judge Mitchell's voice hardened with determination. "I've watched enough children be failed by systems too rigid to adapt. If there's even a chance Emma is trying to tell us she's in danger, I have to listen, even if the language she's speaking is one I've never heard before." Through his chamber window, Judge Mitchell could see the courthouse lawn where a group of pigeons pecked at scattered breadcrumbs. They communicated through coos and body language, understanding each other perfectly despite never speaking a human word. Why should Emma be any different? Communication wasn't limited to spoken language. The law already recognized sign language, written statements, even recorded videos as valid testimony. Maybe, just maybe, it was time the law recognized that sometimes the truth came in the most unexpected forms. A knock at his door pulled him from his thoughts, poked her head in. "Your Honor, Doctor has arrived, and she's brought documentation, training records, therapy session notes, even video evidence of Emma's communication development with the dog." Judge Mitchell straightened his robes and took a long sip of coffee. "Then let's find out what Emma has been trying to tell us." As he walked back into the courtroom, he noticed Emma's posture had changed slightly. She was sitting up now, her hand resting on Biscuit's head. The dog's tail gave a small, hopeful wag, and when Emma's eyes met the judge's for just a brief second, he saw something there that made his decision crystal clear. She was begging him to understand, to see, to listen. And by God, Judge Harold Mitchell was going to do exactly that, even if it meant rewriting the rules of testimony itself. The truth was waiting. It was time to decode it. Dr. Sarah entered the courtroom with the purposeful stride of someone who'd been waiting for this moment. She was in her early 40s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and an air of quiet authority that came from years of working with traumatized children. Her arms were laden with folders, tablets, and what appeared to be training manuals, all of which she deposited carefully on the witness stand as Judge Mitchell called the court back to order. "Doctor," the judge began, leaning forward with intense focus, "please state your credentials for the record." Doctor adjusted her glasses and spoke clearly into the microphone. "I have a PhD in clinical psychology from university, specializing in childhood trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm a licensed therapist with 16 years of experience, and I'm certified in animal-assisted therapy interventions. For the past 8 years, I've worked specifically with children who experienced severe trauma resulting in communication disorders, including selective mutism." Winters stood immediately. "Your Honor, while doctor's credentials are impressive, I fail to see how animal therapy relates to admissible courtroom testimony. This appears to be an attempt to introduce hearsay through a very creative and legally unsound." "Noted, Ms. Winters. Sit down." Judge Mitchell's tone was sharp. "Doctor, explain to me exactly what I've been observing. What is happening between Emma and that dog?" Doctor's expression softened as she glanced at Emma, who was watching intently from the witness chair. Biscuit still pressed protectively against her legs. "Your Honor, Emma came to me 4 months ago, referred by her caseworker after traditional talk therapy proved ineffective. Emma was diagnosed with selective mutism, a severe anxiety disorder where a person who is capable of speech becomes unable to speak in specific situations or to specific people." "So she can physically speak?" the judge asked. "Yes, Your Honor. There's no physical impairment. This is psychological, a trauma response so severe that her brain literally cannot produce words when she's triggered by memories or fear. It's the mind's way of protecting itself when the trauma is too overwhelming to verbalize." Torres shifted in his seat, his face reddening. Winters placed a restraining hand on his arm, but Judge Mitchell saw the flash of anger cross the man's features before he masked it. Doctor continued, pulling out a tablet and queuing up a video. Traditional communication methods weren't working with Emma. She couldn't speak, wouldn't write, shut down completely when pressed. But I noticed she had a natural affinity for dogs. So I partnered with Lighthouse Service Animals, a training facility in Wisconsin that specializes in psychiatric service dogs for children with severe trauma. She turned the tablet toward the judge. "May I show you something, Your Honor?" Judge Mitchell nodded and Doctor pressed play. The video showed Emma looking slightly healthier than she did today, sitting in what appeared to be a therapy office. Biscuit, younger and slightly smaller, sat beside her. Doctor's voice came through the speakers. "Emma, if you're feeling scared, touch Biscuit's left ear twice." On screen, Emma hesitantly reached out and tapped behind Biscuit's ear. Tap, tap. The dog immediately sat at attention and released a soft whine. "Good, now if you're feeling safe, stroke under his chin slowly." Emma and Biscuit's whole demeanor changed, relaxing into a calm sit, his tail wagging gently. The video showed weeks of training compressed into minutes, Emma learning dozens of signals, each one corresponding to specific words, feelings, or concepts. Fear, safety, hunger, pain, yes, no, danger, help. The complexity was astonishing. "Biscuit isn't just providing comfort," Doctor explained as the video ended. "He's been trained to respond to 63 distinct signals, each representing something Emma needs to communicate. He's essentially a living, breathing, augmentative communication device, no different in legal principle than a speech-generating device for someone with a physical disability." David stood, his voice excited. "Your Honor, the law already recognizes alternative communication methods. We allow sign language interpreters. We accept typed communications from nonverbal individuals with autism. We even admit video testimony in special circumstances. This is functionally the same thing." "Functionally?" Winters scoffed, rising to her feet. "Your Honor, with all due respect to Doctor's work, there's a massive difference between established communication methods and interpreting a dog's behaviors. How do we know the child isn't being coached? How do we verify the accuracy of these so-called translations? This opens the door to massive manipulation." Judge Mitchell rubbed his temples. The lawyer had a point that would certainly be raised in any appeal. But something about dismissing Emma's attempts to communicate felt fundamentally wrong, like silencing a victim all over again. "Doctor," he said carefully, "how reliable is this method? Can you demonstrate it's not just you reading whatever you want into random dog behaviors?" Doctor nodded, expecting the question. "Your Honor, I can demonstrate right now. With your permission, I'd like to ask Emma a series of questions, factual questions where we can verify her answers independently. You'll see the signals are consistent, specific, and accurate." "Objection," Winters' voice rose. "This is a demonstration, not testimony. It proves nothing about past events." "Overruled," Judge Mitchell said firmly. "I'm trying to determine if this communication method is reliable enough to be considered. Doctor, proceed, but keep it simple and verifiable." Doctor approached Emma carefully, kneeling beside the witness stand so they were at eye level. "Emma, sweetheart, I'm going to ask you some easy questions, okay? Just answer with Biscuit like we practiced." Emma nodded slightly, her hand already resting on the dog's head. "Is your name Emma?" Doctor asked. Emma's fingers pressed gently on top of Biscuit's head, a single, firm push. The dog immediately stood and placed both front paws on Emma's lap, looking directly at her face. "That's her signal for yes," Doctor translated. "Are you 8 years old?" The same signal. Biscuit repeated the behavior perfectly. "Are you 10 years old?" Emma's hand moved to Biscuit's right shoulder, pressing twice rapidly. The dog immediately backed away from her, sitting several feet back and turning his head to the side. "That's no," Doctor explained. "Notice the behavior is completely different." Judge Mitchell leaned forward, fascinated despite himself. "Ask her something only she would know, something we can verify." Doctor thought for a moment. "Emma, what color is your foster mother's car? If it's red, signal yes. If it's not red, signal no." Emma's hand went to Biscuit's shoulder, the no signal. Williams called out from the gallery, "It's blue, Your Honor, a blue Civic." "Emma, is it blue?" Doctor asked. The yes signal. Biscuit's paws on her lap, his face close to hers. The courtroom buzzed with whispered conversations. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, watching with undisguised amazement. "Ask her something about her father," Judge Mitchell said quietly. "Something factual we can verify." The room fell silent. Emma's entire body tensed, her breathing becoming rapid and shallow. Biscuit immediately pressed against her, his body language shifting to protective mode before Doctor even spoke. "Emma," Doctor said gently, "did your father have a job when you lived with him?" Emma's hands trembled as they moved to Biscuit's ear, but not the simple double tap they'd seen before. This was different. Her fingers pressed behind the ear, then slid down to the shoulder, then back up to the other ear. It was a combination, a sequence. Biscuit's response was immediate and dramatic. He stood rigid, his body creating a barrier between Emma and the rest of the courtroom. He whined not the soft sound from before, but a distressed, urgent vocalization. Then he lowered into a down position and crawled partially under Emma's chair, his head visible but his body hidden. Doctor's voice shook slightly as she translated. "That's a complex signal we developed for complicated truths. She's saying, sometimes, or not really, or he lied about it. It's her way of indicating something isn't as simple as yes or no." Judge Mitchell's pulse quickened. He turned to his clerk, pulled Tor's employment records, everything submitted with his custody petition. Winters shot to her feet. "Your Honor, you cannot make evidentiary rulings based on a dog's behavior." "I'm not making a ruling, Ms. Winters. I'm following up on testimony. Yes, testimony that contradicts evidence presented to this court. If Mr. Torres submitted fraudulent employment documentation, that's perjury, and I will know about it." The judge's voice carried the full weight of his authority. Torres had gone pale, his hands gripping the table in front of him, so hard his knuckles were white. Doctor continued, her confidence growing. "Your Honor, Emma has been ready to tell her story for months. She's been screaming it in the only language her traumatized brain will allow. Every therapy session, she's communicated details about her life with her father, details that, when I shared them with Child Protective Services, matched their investigative findings exactly." "Hearsay," Winters interjected, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "Not if we let Emma tell it herself directly right now," David countered. "Your Honor, please, let Doctor ask the real questions. Let Emma tell us what happened to her." Judge Mitchell looked at Emma, really looked at her. The child who'd walked into his courtroom frozen with terror was now sitting, her hand steady on Biscuit's head. There was something in her eyes, hope, desperate, fragile hope that finally someone would listen. The judge made his decision. "Doctor, I'm going to allow you to question Emma using this communication method. Ms. Winters, you'll have the opportunity to cross-examine both Doctor and the method itself. But this child will have her chance to speak, even if she does it through her dog. He paused, his gaze sweeping the courtroom. Sometimes justice requires us to listen in new ways. Today is one of those days. Emma's hand pressed firmly on Biscuit's head. The yes signal. She was ready to tell her truth. And the courtroom was finally ready to hear it. The courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath as Dr. Sarah positioned herself beside Emma, her voice gentle but clear enough for everyone to hear. Judge Mitchell leaned back in his chair, his experienced eyes missing nothing. Not the way Tor's leg bounced nervously under the table, not the protective way Williams gripped her husband's hand in the gallery, and certainly not the determined set of Emma's small jaw as she placed her hand on Biscuit's golden head. Emma, Doctor began softly, I'm going to ask you about living with your father. You can take your time. Biscuit is right here with you and you're safe. Do you understand? Emma's fingers pressed gently on Biscuit's head, the yes signal. The dog placed his paws on her lap, his brown eyes locked on her face with unwavering devotion. When you lived with your father, did he make sure you had food every day? The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Emma's hand trembled as it moved from Biscuit's head to his right shoulder, 2 rapid presses. The dog immediately backed away, sitting several feet back and turning his head to the side. No, Doctor translated, her voice tight with emotion. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. The caseworker closed her eyes as if in pain. She'd suspected this, documented concerns about it, but hearing it confirmed through Emma's own communication was different, visceral and heartbreaking. Were there days when you were hungry, Emma, when there was no food in the house? Emma's entire body shuddered. Her hand shot to Biscuit's ear, then slid down to his collar, then pressed firmly on his shoulder in a complex sequence that made the dog leap to his feet, press his full body weight against her legs, and release a series of distressed whines that echoed off the courtroom walls. That's her signal for many times or often, Doctor explained, her professional composure cracking slightly. She's telling us this wasn't occasional, it was a pattern. Objection. Winters was on her feet, though her voice lacked its earlier fire. Even she seemed shaken by what was unfolding. Your Honor, this is leading the witness. Doctor is asking questions that presuppose abuse. Overruled, Judge Mitchell said quietly, his eyes never leaving Emma. Continue, Doctor. Torres lurched forward in his seat. This is insane. I worked 2 jobs to feed that kid. She's confused, she's been brainwashed by those foster people. Mr. Torres, one more outburst and I'll have you removed from this courtroom, Judge Mitchell warned, his voice sharp as a blade. Bailiff, please be ready to escort Mr. Torres out if necessary. The bailiff stepped forward, his hand resting on his belt, his expression making it clear he'd be more than happy to comply with the judge's order. Doctor continued, each question carefully measured. Emma, when your father went out, did he leave you alone in the apartment? The yes signal firm and immediate. For a long time, hours. Another yes. Days. Emma's hand hesitated, hovering over Biscuit's fur as if the weight of the answer was too heavy to deliver. Then, slowly, deliberately, she pressed down on the dog's head. Yes. The dog's paws came up to her lap, but this time Biscuit's entire body was trembling, absorbing Emma's escalating distress like a furry emotional sponge. Williams began crying softly in the gallery, her husband's arm wrapped tightly around her shoulders. David had to turn away, his jaw clenched, his hands balled into fists. Were you scared when you were alone? Doctor asked, her own voice wavering now. Yes. Did you try to tell anyone? Emma's hand performed another complex signal, a combination that made Biscuit back away, then approach, then press against her in a sequence that spoke of confusion and contradiction. She's saying tried but couldn't, or wanted to but was afraid, Doctor translated. Emma, were you afraid of what your father would do if you told someone? The yes was so emphatic that Biscuit practically jumped into Emma's lap, his body creating a complete shield between the little girl and her father's table. Judge Mitchell's hands gripped his gavel so tightly his knuckles went white. In 23 years on the bench, he'd presided over hundreds of abuse cases, but there was something uniquely devastating about watching a child communicate her trauma through these careful, deliberate signals, each one a word she was too terrified to speak aloud. "Emma," Doctor pressed on, though tears were now streaming down her own cheeks, "did your father ever lock you in your room?" "Yes." "For hours?" "Yes." "Without food or water?" The complex signal again, sometimes yes, sometimes no, the truth living in the terrible gray area between absolutes. Judge Mitchell's clerk was typing furiously, ensuring every word, every signal, every translation was captured in the official record. This testimony would be scrutinized, analyzed, potentially appealed, but it would exist, permanent and undeniable. "Did you miss school often?" Doctor asked. Emma's yes was immediate and emphatic. "Because you were sick." The no signal, Biscuit backing away, turning his head. "Because your father didn't take you." "Yes." "Because there was no one to take you." Another complex signal, Biscuit's confused sequence of movements painting a picture of a child left to fend for herself, a father who disappeared for days, a little girl who couldn't get to school because there was no adult to ensure she did. Winters stood again, and this time her objection came with less conviction, as if even she was disturbed by what was emerging. "Your Honor, I must object to this entire line of questioning. We have no way to verify these claims. The child could be signaling anything. We're relying entirely on doctor's interpretation." Judge Mitchell was about to respond when David jumped in. "Your Honor, we can verify these claims. We have school attendance records showing Emma missed 73 days of school in the 5 months before her removal. We have statements from teachers expressing concern. We have neighbor testimonies about seeing Emma alone. We have medical records from her emergency foster placement showing malnutrition and neglect. Emma isn't making accusations. She's confirming what the evidence already tells us." The judge nodded slowly. "Ms. Winters, your objection is noted for the record, but I'm going to allow this testimony to continue. You'll have your opportunity to challenge it. Doctor, proceed." Doctor took a deep breath, steadying herself for what she knew would be the hardest questions. "Emma, sweetheart, I need to ask you about the night the police came. The night you were removed from your father's apartment. Do you remember that night?" Emma's entire body went rigid. Her breathing became rapid and shallow, the beginning of a panic attack that Doctor had seen dozens of times in their therapy sessions. Biscuit responded immediately, climbing fully into Emma's lap despite his size, his weight providing deep pressure therapy, his presence a reminder that she was safe, that the past couldn't hurt her anymore. "It's okay," Doctor soothed. "You're safe, we're right here. Can you tell us, were you alone that night?" Emma's hand shook violently as it pressed down on Biscuit's head. "Yes." "For how long?" "1 day." "No." "2 days." "No." "More than 2 days." The yes came with such force that Emma's whole hand slapped against Biscuit's fur. The dog whined loudly, licking her face, trying desperately to comfort her. 3 days, 4 days, Doctor's voice broke completely. Emma's complex signal, the one indicating many, or a long time, came with heaving sobs, though no sound emerged from her throat. Silent tears streamed down her face as her body shook with the effort of finally telling the truth she'd been carrying alone for so long. Stood from the gallery, her professional composure shattered. "Your Honor, the police report stated Emma had been alone for 4 consecutive days when neighbors called 911. She was found on the apartment steps at midnight, crying because she'd been locked out and had nowhere to go. She was wearing the same clothes she'd worn to school the previous week. She hadn't bathed. She'd been surviving on crackers and water." Torres exploded from his seat, his carefully maintained facade crumbling completely. "That's a lie. My mother was supposed to be watching her. I was working. I was providing for my daughter." "Your mother had been dead for 8 months, Mr. Torres," David said coldly, pulling a document from his file. "We have the death certificate right here, dated February 12th, 8 months before Emma's removal. You collected your mother's Social Security benefits for 8 months after her death, and you told neighbors and school officials she was caring for Emma when you knew she was dead." The courtroom erupted. Winters grabbed his arm, trying to silence him, but the damage was done. The mask had slipped, and everyone could see the truth underneath. Judge Mitchell banged his gavel hard. "Order, I will have order." The room fell silent. "Mr. Torres, sit down and do not speak again unless I directly address you. Ms. Winters, control your client." Emma had collapsed against Biscuit, her small body racked with silent sobs, her fingers twisted deep in his fur. Williams was crying openly now, as was half the gallery. Even Bailiff had to turn away, his jaw clenched against emotion. Doctor knelt beside Emma, wrapping an arm around both the child and the dog. "You did it, Emma," she whispered. "You told them. You're so brave. It's over now." But Judge Mitchell knew it wasn't over. Not yet. "Doctor," he said quietly, his voice carrying despite its softness, "one final question. Ask Emma if she feels safe with her father. Ask her if she wants to go back to him." The courtroom fell into absolute silence, the kind of silence that precedes either salvation or catastrophe. Doctor looked at Emma, at this tiny warrior who'd found a way to speak when speech had been stolen from her. "Emma, do you feel safe with your father?" Emma's hand moved to Biscuit's shoulder, 2 sharp, frantic presses. "No." "Do you want to go back to living with him?" "No," emphatic, immediate, desperate. "Do you feel safe with and Robert, your foster parents?" Emma's hand pressed gently on Biscuit's head, and for the first time that day, the dog's tail wagged with genuine joy as he placed his paws on her lap. "Yes." "Is that where you want to stay?" "Yes, yes, yes." Judge Mitchell removed his glasses, wiping his eyes in a gesture that was entirely human and completely unprofessional and absolutely necessary. In 23 years, he'd never been so certain of a truth, and he'd never been so grateful that a little girl and her remarkable dog had found a way to shine light into the darkest corners of injustice. "We'll take a 30-minute recess," he announced, his voice rough. "When we return, I want to see all medical records, all CPS investigation reports, all school documentation, and all financial records for Mr. Torres. Everything. And then we're going to talk about what justice looks like for Emma Torres." As the courtroom emptied, Emma remained in the witness stand, her face buried in Biscuit's fur, finally, believing that someone had heard her. And someone had. Judge Harold Mitchell sat alone in his chambers, surrounded by a mountain of manila folders, medical charts, and documentation that painted a picture so disturbing he had to periodically stand and pace to the window just to breathe. The Chicago skyline stretched before him, thousands of families in those buildings, thousands of children. How many were suffering in silence like Emma? How many didn't have a Biscuit to help them speak? He returned to his desk and opened the pediatric evaluation report from Dr. Foster, the emergency room physician who'd first examined Emma when Child Protective Services brought her in 6 months ago. The clinical language couldn't mask the horror beneath. Patient Emma Torres, age 8 years, 2 months. Presenting condition: severe malnutrition, dehydration, poor hygiene. Height: 47 inches, 25th percentile. Weight: 42 pounds, less than 3rd percentile, significantly underweight for age and height. Patient appeared frightened, non-communicative, flinching at sudden movements. Judge Mitchell's jaw tightened as he read further. Emma had been brought to Lutheran General Hospital at 1:47 a.m. after police found her crying on the steps of her apartment building. The arresting officer's report. He pulled that file now. stated they'd received a 911 call from a neighbor, Mrs. Washington, who reported hearing a child crying for hours. He found Mrs. Washington's witness statement and read it again, though he'd already memorized the key passages. "I heard that baby crying for days. I kept thinking her daddy would come home, but I never saw him. Finally, I couldn't take it no more. That child was sitting on those cold concrete steps in just a thin dress, no coat, and it was 43 degrees that night. She was shaking so hard her teeth were chattering. When I asked where her daddy was, she just shook her head. Wouldn't speak a word. I called 911 right then." A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts, entered with more files. "Your Honor, the financial records you requested, and is here with additional documentation from the home inspection." "Send her in." Entered, looking exhausted but determined. She'd been Emma's caseworker from day one, fighting through bureaucracy and legal challenges to keep the child safe. She placed a thick binder on the judge's desk. "Your Honor, this is everything we documented during our investigation. Photos from the apartment, interviews with neighbors, school records, medical follow-ups. It's all here." She paused, her voice dropping. "I've worked child welfare for 12 years. This case haunts me. That little girl survived something that would break most adults." Judge Mitchell opened the binder to the photographic evidence section. The first image stopped him cold. Emma's bedroom, if it could be called that. A bare mattress on the floor, no sheets or blankets visible, walls with peeling paint, a single exposed hanging from the ceiling. No toys, no books, no evidence that a child lived there except for a small pile of dirty clothes in the corner. The kitchen photos were worse. Empty cupboards, a refrigerator containing only condiments and a carton of spoiled milk dated 3 weeks prior to Emma's removal, garbage overflowing. Dirty dishes piled in the sink with visible mold growth. "This is where she lived," said quietly, though it wasn't a question. "For 18 months after her mother died. Torres received Emma's survivor benefits $987 per month from Social Security, meant for her care. We subpoenaed his bank records. Want to guess where that money went?" Judge Mitchell looked up at her. "Casino ATM withdrawals, sports betting apps, online poker sites. In 18 months, deposited $17,766 in survivor benefits meant for Emma. He spent $16,200 of it gambling. The rest went to his rent and utilities. We found evidence he spent approximately $47 per month on food total, not just for Emma. That's less than $2 a day to feed a growing child." The judge's hands trembled as he reached for the next document, Emma's school records from Horace Elementary. Her third-grade teacher, Mrs. Jennifer, had filed 5 separate reports with the school counselor expressing concern. September 15. Emma came to school wearing the same clothes as Monday and Tuesday. Outfit appears unwashed. She fell asleep during reading time. October 3. Emma ate her entire lunch in under 3 minutes, then asked if she could have other students' leftovers. I gave her my own lunch. She cried and ate that too. Something is very wrong. November 12. Emma has missed 23 days of school this semester. When she does attend, she hoards food. I've found granola bars, crackers, even packets of ketchup hidden in her desk. I've reported this to administration multiple times. December 8. Emma came to school with no coat despite 28-degree weather. Her lips were blue. The school nurse examined her and found she was wearing summer clothes, a thin t-shirt and shorts in December. When asked about a coat, Emma wouldn't speak, just shook her head. January 19. I don't know what to do. Emma is clearly being neglected, but every time CPS investigates, her father talks his way out of it. Today, Emma fainted during PE. The nurse said she's malnourished. This child is wasting away and no one is helping her. Judge Mitchell closed his eyes. The system had failed Emma repeatedly. Reports were filed. Concerns were raised. But Torres was articulate, employed or claimed to be, and knew exactly what to say to deflect suspicion. Entered again. Your Honor, Dr. Foster is here. You asked to speak with her before court reconvenes. Dr. Foster was a woman in her 50s with the weary competence of someone who'd spent decades in emergency medicine. She sat across from Judge Mitchell, her hands folded in her lap. Doctor, tell me about Emma's condition when you first examined her. Dr. Foster pulled out her own notes, though it was clear she didn't need them. This case was seared into her memory. Your Honor, in 26 years of emergency pediatrics, I've seen severe neglect more times than I care to count. But Emma, she paused, collecting herself. That child was in the early stages of failure to thrive. She weighed 42 pounds. A healthy 8-year-old should weigh between 55 and 65 pounds. She was severely dehydrated, showing signs of chronic malnutrition. Explain that in layman's terms, the judge requested. Her body was cannibalizing itself. When you don't get enough calories, your body starts breaking down its own muscle tissue for energy. Emma had almost no body fat. Her hair was brittle and falling out, a sign of protein deficiency. She had bleeding gums from scurvy, actual scurvy, a disease we virtually never see in modern America because it requires extreme vitamin C deficiency over months. Dr. Foster's voice grew harder, more clinical, the only way to discuss such horrors without breaking down. She had 6 untreated cavities, 2 of which had abscessed, causing chronic pain. She had a urinary tract infection that had likely been present for weeks, painful, treatable with simple antibiotics, but left to fester because no one took her to a doctor. Her feet had blisters that had become infected because she'd been wearing shoes 2 sizes too small. And Your Honor, when we undressed her for examination, we found bruises. Judge Mitchell's head snapped up. Bruises, physical abuse. Not the pattern typical of beating, Dr. Foster clarified. These were from accidents, falling, bumping into things in the dark. But they tell a story. Children who are properly supervised and cared for don't accumulate injuries like this. These were the bruises of a child left to navigate a world alone, without adult protection or guidance. What about psychological trauma? Severe. Emma wouldn't make eye contact. She flinched at sudden movements. She wouldn't speak, not a single word in the 3 hours she was in the ER. When we tried to give her food, she grabbed it and tried to hide it in her hospital gown, hoarding behavior consistent with chronic food insecurity. She's been living in survival mode, Your Honor. Her brain has been flooded with stress hormones for so long that her normal development has been disrupted. Dr. Foster leaned forward, her professionalism giving way to raw emotion. That little girl should have been learning multiplication and making friends and playing soccer. Instead, she was learning how to survive alone, how to make a jar of peanut butter last a week, how to stay quiet so the neighbors wouldn't realize she was abandoned. No 8-year-old should have those skills. A silence fell over the chamber. Judge Mitchell pulled another document, the psychological evaluation from Dr. conducted 2 months after Emma's placement in foster care. Patient demonstrates severe symptoms of complex post-traumatic stress disorder (CPTSD), including selective mutism, hypervigilance, emotional dysregulation, and attachment difficulties. Patient exhibits intense fear response when discussing biological father. Nightmares reported 5-6 times per week. Patient hoards food despite consistent access to meals. Patient requires extensive therapy and should not be returned to previous living situation under any circumstances. Your Honor said, pulling out another file, we also have the financial records you requested. Tor's employment history is interesting. She spread out pay stubs and tax returns. He claimed to be working 2 jobs to support Emma. His custody petition stated he was employed full-time at manufacturing and part-time at a landscaping company. But when we investigated, we found manufacturing let him go 14 months ago for excessive absences. The landscaping company has no record of him ever working there. So where was his income coming from? Sporadic day labor, under-the-table work, and illegal gambling. We found evidence he was running an unlicensed sports betting operation out of his apartment, which explains why he was gone for days at a time. He'd go to Indiana or Iowa, where casinos are legal, place bets for other people, take a cut. Sometimes he'd win, disappear for a week celebrating. Sometimes he'd lose and have to work off debts. Emma was just left behind, forgotten. Judge Mitchell felt a cold rage building in his chest, the kind of anger that came from seeing a child betrayed by the one person meant to protect her above all others. And his mother, the judge asked. He claimed she was watching Emma. Pulled out a death certificate. Torres died February 12th of a heart attack, attended the funeral. He cleaned out her apartment. He knew she was dead, but he kept telling Emma's school, the neighbors, even CPS investigators that his mother was the primary caregiver. He collected his mother's Social Security benefits for 8 months, fraud, and he used Emma's isolation to hide his neglect. A child alone can't tell anyone what's happening, especially when that child has learned that speaking up brings punishment. Knocked again. Your Honor, court reconvenes in 10 minutes. The gallery is full. Word has spread about Emma's testimony. There are reporters outside. Judge Mitchell stood, straightening his robes. He gathered the most damning documents, the medical reports, the photos, the financial records. This wasn't just a custody case anymore. This was a criminal matter, a case study in systemic failure, and a little girl's last chance at justice. Dr. Foster, thank you. Your testimony may be needed in the criminal case against Mr. Torres. As they left, Judge Mitchell took one final look at a document had flagged. A letter from Williams, Emma's foster mother, written 3 months into the placement. Your Honor, Emma is starting to smile. She's gained 8 pounds. She's sleeping through the night. Yesterday she actually laughed when our dog knocked over a glass of water. It was the most beautiful sound I've ever heard. Please don't send her back to that man. She's just starting to be a child again. Please. Judge Mitchell folded the letter carefully and placed it in his breast pocket, right over his heart. It was time to make sure Emma Torres never had to survive alone again. Justice wasn't just about following the law. It was about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. And today, justice would speak with a voice amplified by evidence, by truth, and by the undeniable testimony of a little girl and her extraordinary dog. He walked back into the courtroom, ready to ensure that Emma's suffering would finally, definitively end. The courtroom felt different when Judge Mitchell returned from recess. The air was thick with anticipation, and the gallery had filled beyond capacity. Reporters lined the back wall. Social workers from other cases had slipped in to witness this unprecedented testimony, and even courthouse staff who'd heard whispers about the girl with the dog had found reasons to be present. Emma remained in the witness stand, Biscuit pressed protectively against her legs, while Williams watched from the front row with red-rimmed eyes that hadn't stopped leaking tears since the recess began. Torres sat at the defendant's table looking diminished somehow. His earlier bravado had evaporated, replaced by the hunched posture of a man who knew the walls were closing in. His attorney, Winters, shuffled papers with less confidence than before, her sharp edges dulled by the weight of evidence mounting against her client. "Court is now in session," Judge Mitchell announced, his voice carrying the gravity of what was to come. "Ms. Prosecutor, you may proceed." Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Martinez stood, a fierce woman in her 40s who'd built her career prosecuting child abuse cases. She approached Torres with the precision of a surgeon preparing to make the first incision. "Mr. Torres," she began, her voice deceptively pleasant, "you love your daughter and that you've always provided for her to the best of your ability. Is that correct?" Straightened slightly, grasping at the familiar script he'd rehearsed. "Yes, that's right. I worked 2 jobs to give Emma everything she needed. Being a single father isn't easy, but I did my best." "2 jobs," Martinez repeated, letting the words hang. "Can you tell the court where you were employed during the 18 months following your wife's death?" I worked at manufacturing, full-time on the assembly line, and I did landscaping work on weekends for Martinez Lawn Services. Delivered the lines smoothly, almost convincingly. Manufacturing, Martinez said, pulling a document from her file. Would you be surprised to learn that manufacturing terminated your employment on August 3rd, 14 months before Emma was removed from your care? The color drained from his face. There must be some mistake. I worked there until you were fired for missing 17 shifts in 2 months, Martinez interrupted, her voice sharp now. Your supervisor, Michael, provided us with detailed termination records. Would you like me to read them aloud, or would you like to revise your testimony? Winters rose quickly. Your Honor, my client may have been confused about dates, the stress of this custody battle. Sit down, Ms. Winters, Judge Mitchell said coldly. Your client is under oath. Confusion doesn't excuse perjury. Mr. Torres, answer the question. His hands clenched into fists on the table. Okay, so maybe let me go, but I found other work. I did day labor construction. Sporadic, under-the-table work that provided no consistent income, Martinez countered. And Martinez Lawn Services. That company doesn't exist, Mr. Torres. We've searched business registrations in Illinois, Indiana, and Wisconsin. There is no such company. You lied about your employment in your custody petition. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Emma's hand moved to Biscuit's head, a gentle press that made the dog lean harder against her, providing silent support as her father's lies unraveled in real time. Let's talk about money, Martinez continued, circling now like a predator who'd scented blood. Emma received Social Security survivor benefits after her mother's death. How much per month? I don't remember exactly, stammered. $987 per month. $987 deposited directly into your account on the 3rd of each month for 18 months. That's $17,766 total. Money designated specifically for Emma's care, food, clothing, medical expenses, and education. Can you tell the court how you spent that money? Silence. His mouth opened and closed, but no words emerged. Martinez slapped a thick stack of bank statements onto the defense table. Allow me to help refresh your memory. These are your bank records, subpoenaed by Child Protective Services. In 18 months, you made 127 ATM withdrawals at various casinos: Horseshoe Hammond, Rivers Casino Plains, Grand Victoria Casino. You spent $8,400 on an online sports betting platform called Scorebet. You transferred $4,200 to an illegal bookmaker named Vincent, who we've arrested on separate gambling charges, and who was very cooperative in providing information about your betting habits. Each revelation hit like a physical blow. The gallery gasped, was nodding grimly, her documentation vindicated. David watched with grim satisfaction as the monster's mask finally, completely shattered. That's not, I had debts. I was trying to win money to provide better for Emma. His voice rose defensively, desperately. You were gambling away your daughter's survival money while she starved. Martinez's composure cracked, real anger bleeding through. While Emma was eating ketchup packets stolen from her school cafeteria, you were betting hundreds of dollars on football games. While she was wearing shoes 2 sizes too small because you wouldn't buy new ones, you were playing blackjack at the Horseshoe. Objection, argumentative. Winters tried, but her heart wasn't in it. Sustained, Judge Mitchell said automatically, though his eyes blazed with fury. Ms. Martinez maintained composure, but continue. Martinez took a breath, regaining her clinical precision. Mr. Torres, let's discuss your mother. You told Emma's school principal, her teachers, and 2 different CPS investigators that your mother, Torres, was the primary caregiver for Emma when you were working. Is that correct? Yes, my mother helped out. She loved Emma. Your mother died on February 12th, 8 months before Emma was removed from your custody. Martinez's voice dropped to a deadly whisper. You attended her funeral. You cleaned out her apartment. You stopped paying rent on her unit. You knew she was dead, Mr. Torres, yet you continued telling people she was caring for Emma. Why? The silence was deafening. His face had gone from pale to ashen to a sickly gray. His mouth worked soundlessly. I'll tell you why, Martinez pressed on. Because a dead woman can't contradict your lies. A dead woman can't report that your 8-year-old daughter was being left alone for days at a time. A dead woman can't call CPS when she sees evidence of neglect. Your mother's death didn't just remove Emma's grandmother. It removed the last witness to your abandonment of your child. And you exploited that. Emma made a sound, not quite a sob, more like a wounded animal's whimper, and buried her face in Biscuit's neck. The dog responded immediately, his entire body curving around her in protection. And there's more, Martinez said, her voice hardening further. After your mother's death, you continued collecting her Social Security benefits for 8 months, $1,124 per month in survivor benefits. That's an additional $8,992 in federal benefits fraud. Combined with the misuse of Emma's benefits, you've stolen over $26,000 in government funds, while your daughter lived in conditions that meet the legal definition of severe child endangerment. Winters had given up objecting. She sat with her hand over her eyes, probably already planning how to minimize the criminal charges her client now faced. Let me ask you some simple questions, Mr. Torres, Martinez said, switching tactics. Questions any loving father should be able to answer. What's Emma's favorite color? Blinked, pink. Emma's hand moved to Biscuit's shoulder, 2 quick presses. The no signal. Wrong, what's her teacher's name? Mrs. K something. Mrs. Martinez supplied. Who is Emma's best friend at school? There's a girl, Sarah, I think. Called out from the gallery, unable to contain herself. Emma's best friend is a boy named Henley. She talked about him constantly before she went mute, before your neglect stole her voice. Judge Mitchell didn't reprimand the outburst. The answer itself was damning enough. Torres didn't even know his daughter had befriended a boy who shared his own name, a detail any involved parent would have noticed immediately. What's Emma's favorite food? Martinez continued the litany of paternal ignorance. Pizza, I guess. Kids like pizza. Strawberries, William said quietly from the gallery. She loves fresh strawberries. She told me once back when she could still speak that her mother used to make strawberry shortcake for her birthday every year. We made it together last month. She smiled for the first time in weeks. Martinez turned back to her expression one of pure contempt. You don't know your daughter at all, do you? She's not a person to you. She's a monthly check, a benefits payment, a source of income to fuel your gambling addiction. When did you last tell Emma you loved her? His face twisted with something. Was it shame? Anger, the realization that he'd been exposed. Every day. I told her every day. Emma's reaction was instantaneous and violent. Her hand slammed down on Biscuit's shoulder, not just 2 presses but repeated, frantic denials that made the dog back away, whining in distress at her agitation. Then she did something she hadn't done since entering the courtroom. She looked directly at her father, and her young face held an expression of such profound betrayal and disgust that several people in the gallery gasped. Doctor, watching from the side, translated unnecessarily. She's saying no. Emphatically, repeatedly, desperately no. He's lying, and she needs everyone to know he's lying. Your Honor, Martinez said, turning to face the bench. I'd like to submit into evidence the recording from the police body camera on the night Emma was found. It's brief, but I believe the court should see it. Judge Mitchell nodded grimly. Proceed. The courtroom lights dimmed, and a screen lowered from the ceiling. The video began. Nighttime, police lights flashing blue and red across a shabby apartment building. The camera jostled as Officer James approached a small figure huddled on the concrete steps. Emma, wearing a thin dress, no coat, shivering violently in the 43-degree October night. "Hey there, sweetheart," officer's voice came through the speakers, gentle and concerned. "What's your name? Where are your parents?" Emma on the screen just stared, mute and terrified, her eyes huge in her small face. "How long have you been out here, honey? Are you locked out?" A tiny nod, the only communication she'd manage. "Where's your mom or dad?" Emma's face crumpled, and silent tears streamed down her cheeks as she shook her head. She didn't know or couldn't say or both. "When did you last eat?" Emma held up 3 fingers, then 4, then stopped, confused, unable to remember, time blurring into an endless stretch of hunger and fear. The video showed Officer wrapping his jacket around Emma's shoulders, calling for backup, and eventually carrying her to the patrol car because she was too weak and cold to walk. The last image before the video ended was Emma's face in the car's dome light, hollow-eyed, silent, and utterly alone. The lights came back up. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of crying, Williams, several reporters, even the bailiff wiping his eyes. Judge Mitchell removed his glasses and rubbed his face. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute judgment. "Mr. Torres, in 23 years on this bench, I have never been more disgusted by a parent's behavior. You didn't just neglect your daughter. You systematically exploited her, defrauded the government, and left her to suffer while you pursued your own selfish interests." Opened his mouth to protest, but the judge's raised hand silenced him. "You're not a father. You're a parasite who happened to share DNA with a child you viewed as nothing more than a revenue stream. And that ends today." The monster was fully unmasked now, stripped of all pretense, exposed in the harsh light of truth. And justice, patient and methodical, was finally ready to strike. Judge Harold Mitchell retreated to his chambers with the weight of jurisprudence itself pressing down on his shoulders. The evidence against Torres was overwhelming, damning, even. Any judge could terminate parental rights based on what had been presented. But the question that haunted Mitchell as he sat behind his desk, staring at the leather-bound volumes of case law lining his walls, wasn't whether to remove Emma from her father's custody. That decision was already made, carved in stone by the mountain of evidence. No, the question that would define his legacy was this: could he legally validate Emma's testimony, communication delivered through a service dog, as admissible evidence in a court of law? His clerk entered quietly with fresh coffee and a stack of legal precedents she'd been frantically researching during the recess. "Your Honor, I've found something you need to see." She spread out several case files across his desk. Federal courts have consistently upheld the rights of disabled witnesses to testify using alternative communication methods. In United States v. Rouse, the Ninth Circuit allowed a deaf witness to testify through a sign language interpreter. In Commonwealth v. Spencer, Massachusetts allowed a child with autism to testify using a speech-generating device. In State v. Henderson, Oregon permitted a stroke victim to answer questions by blinking, once for yes, twice for no. Mitchell leaned forward, studying the cases with intense focus. But those were all established communication methods with clear, verifiable protocols. What we're dealing with is unprecedented, a child communicating through trained animal responses. "Not entirely unprecedented," countered, pulling out another file. "Service dogs are already recognized under the ADA as medical equipment for people with disabilities. Courts have allowed service dogs to accompany witnesses on the stand for emotional support. This is just the next logical step, recognizing that for some trauma survivors, the dog isn't just emotional support but an actual communication tool." Judge Mitchell stood and paced to his window, looking out over Chicago. Somewhere in this city were thousands of children suffering in silence, locked in their own prisons of trauma, unable to speak their truths because words had been stolen from them by abuse, neglect, or terror. If he dismissed Emma's testimony because it came through unconventional means, what message would that send to every traumatized child who couldn't find their voice? But if he allowed it, he'd be setting a precedent that could be challenged, appealed, potentially overturned by a higher court. Winters would absolutely file an appeal. She'd have to, for her client. The Illinois Appellate Court would scrutinize every aspect of his decision. If they overturned it, Emma could be back in legal limbo, her testimony invalidated, her suffering dismissed as inadmissible. "Your Honor," said softly, recognizing the internal battle playing out across his features, "what does your gut tell you?" Mitchell turned from the window. In his hand was the letter from Williams. "Please don't send her back to that man. She's just starting to be a child again. Please." "My gut tells me that we've created a legal system so obsessed with procedure that we've forgotten its purpose, protecting the vulnerable." Emma Torres found a way to speak. She fought through her trauma to tell us what happened to her. And if I silence her because her language doesn't fit neatly into our traditional evidentiary boxes, then I'm failing her just as surely as every other adult who turned a blind eye to her suffering. He returned to his desk and began writing, his pen moving with firm, decisive strokes across the legal pad. Watched as he crafted what she recognized would become a landmark decision, one that would be cited in law schools, debated in legal journals, and potentially reshape how courts approach testimony from traumatized witnesses. After 20 minutes, Mitchell looked up. "Call them back in. I'm ready to issue my ruling." The courtroom reassembled with electric tension. Emma remained in the witness stand, Biscuit's steady presence anchoring her to reality. Torres sat rigid at the defense table, his attorney whispering urgent strategies in his ear. The gallery was packed beyond fire code capacity, but no one dared suggest people leave. History was about to be made. Judge Mitchell entered, and the bailiff's call of "all rise" felt more significant than usual, as if the entire room understood the gravity of what was coming. "Please be seated," Mitchell said, settling into his chair and arranging his notes before him. "I'm going to address several matters in this case, starting with the admissibility of Emma Torres' testimony as communicated through her service animal." Winters was already on her feet. "Your Honor, the defense maintains that this form of testimony is unreliable, unverifiable, and without legal precedent. We strenuously object to." "Ms. Winters, I've heard your objections. They're noted for the record. Now sit down and listen to my ruling." The sharpness in his tone left no room for argument. Winters sat. Judge Mitchell took a breath and began. "This court has wrestled with a fundamental question. Can a child communicate truth through means other than spoken words? The law, fortunately, has already answered this question, repeatedly and unequivocally. Yes." He gestured to the stack of case files before him. "Federal and state courts have long recognized that testimony doesn't require vocalization. We accept sign language interpretation, written statements, electronic communication devices, even eye-blink responses. The common thread in all these precedents is that communication, in whatever form it takes, must be reliable, consistent, and verifiable." Emma's hand rested on Biscuit's head as she listened, not fully understanding the legal language but sensing its importance. "Dr. Sarah has provided extensive documentation of Emma's training with her service dog," Mitchell continued. "Video evidence shows consistent, repeatable responses to specific signals. The signals themselves correlate with verifiable facts: Emma's age, her foster mother's car color, details of her daily life. When doctor asks Emma questions with objectively true or false answers, Emma's signals prove accurate 100% of the time in controlled settings." He paused, letting this sink in. "More importantly, Emma's testimony through her service dog has been corroborated by overwhelming independent evidence. Medical records confirm the malnutrition she signaled. School records confirm the absences she indicated. Financial documents prove the gambling and fraud her signals suggested. Neighbor testimony validates the abandonment she communicated. In every verifiable particular, Emma's dog-assisted communication has proven truthful." Winters shifted uncomfortably, sensing where this was heading. The defense argues this method is susceptible to manipulation. That doctor could be reading whatever interpretation she wishes into random dog behaviors. But the evidence refutes this concern. Biscuit is not a pet performing tricks at random. He is a professionally trained psychiatric service dog certified by Lighthouse Service Animals, a nationally recognized training facility. His responses follow documented protocols developed by animal behavior specialists and trauma psychologists. Judge Mitchell's voice grew stronger, more passionate. This court finds that Emma Torr's communication through her service dog Biscuit meets the legal standard for reliable testimony. It is consistent, corroborated, and clinically validated. To reject it simply because it doesn't conform to traditional testimonial methods would be to privilege procedure over justice, a mistake this court refuses to make. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. Emma looked up at Doctor, who was crying and smiling simultaneously. David pumped his fist quietly. Williams grabbed her husband's hand, squeezing hard enough to hurt. Therefore, Mitchell continued, his voice ringing with authority, Emma's testimony is admitted into evidence in its entirety. Every signal, every communication, every truth she conveyed through Biscuit will be considered by this court in determining the best interests of this child. Winters stood, her face flushed. Your Honor, we will be filing an immediate appeal. This decision is. File whatever appeals you wish, Ms. Winters. I'll defend this ruling to the Illinois Supreme Court if necessary. The law evolves to serve justice, not the other way around. The judge shuffled his papers, moving to the next phase. Now, regarding the custody determination and the evidence of abuse, neglect, and fraud. He looked directly at Torres, who seemed to shrink under the weight of that gaze. Mr. Torres, the evidence presented to this court paints a portrait of systematic, calculated neglect that rises to the level of child endangerment. You exploited your daughter financially, abandoned her physically, and traumatized her psychologically. You lied to school officials, social workers, and this court about your employment, your mother's status, and your fitness as a parent. Opened his mouth to protest, but Mitchell cut him off with a raised hand. Medical evidence shows Emma arrived at foster care severely malnourished, medically neglected, and psychologically traumatized. Financial records prove you gambled away her survivor benefits, money designated by law for her care, while she starved. Your own testimony revealed you don't know basic facts about your daughter's life, her friends, her interests. You don't know her at all, Mr. Torres, because you never tried to. She was a paycheck to you, nothing more. The judge's voice dropped to a quieter register, somehow more devastating for its controlled fury. You left your 8-year-old daughter alone for 4 consecutive days. 4 days. Do you comprehend what that means? 4 days of a child wondering if her father would ever come back. 4 days of hunger, fear, and the crushing loneliness of abandonment. 4 days that stole her voice and nearly stole her life. Emma's hand pressed down on Biscuit's head, the yes signal, confirming every word. This court finds by clear and convincing evidence that you are unfit to parent Emma Torres. Your parental rights are hereby terminated, effective immediately and permanently. You will have no custody, no visitation, no contact with Emma whatsoever. Torres exploded from his seat. You can't do this. She's my daughter. You're stealing my kid. Bailiff moved swiftly, positioning himself between and the rest of the courtroom. Mr. Torres, sit down now or you'll be removed. She's mine, that's my blood. His voice cracked with desperation, though whether he mourned losing Emma or losing her benefit payments, no one could say. Judge Mitchell's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Emma Torres is not your property, Mr. Torres. She is a human being, a child who deserves safety, love, and stability, things you never provided and never will. Bailiff, remove Mr. Torres from my courtroom. As another officer escorted the shouting, struggling Torres out of the courtroom, Judge Mitchell turned his attention to the foster parents. And Robert Williams, please approach the bench. The couple stood, hands trembling as they walked forward. They'd been fostering children for 15 years, but Emma had become something more than another placement. She'd become their daughter in every way that mattered. "Mr. and Mrs. Williams," Judge Mitchell said, his voice gentling, "Emma's caseworker and her therapist both recommend that Emma remain in your care permanently. I've reviewed your home studies, your background checks, and your history as foster parents. More importantly, I've watched Emma's response to you, the way she sought your eyes during difficult testimony, the way she relaxes when you're near. She feels safe with you." Williams was openly weeping now. "Your Honor, we love her like our own. We want to adopt her to give her the family she deserves." "Then this court grants you immediate guardianship of Emma Torres, with the strong recommendation that adoption proceedings begin immediately. Emma has suffered enough disruption, enough uncertainty. She needs permanence, and you're prepared to provide it." Emma made a sound, a small, choked noise that might have been the beginning of a word or might have been a sob of relief. Biscuit's tail wagged furiously as he sensed the emotional shift in the room. Judge Mitchell wasn't finished. "Furthermore, I'm ordering the state's attorney to begin criminal proceedings against Torres for child endangerment, child neglect, benefits fraud, and any other applicable charges. This man will answer for what he did to his daughter." He looked at Emma one final time, this brave little girl who'd found a way to speak when speech had been stolen. "Emma, you're safe now, you're home, and no one will ever abandon you again." Emma's hand pressed firmly on Biscuit's head. "Yes, yes, yes." And for the first time since entering the courtroom, her lips curved into something that might someday soon become a smile. Justice had spoken, and it had listened. 6 months had passed since that October day when Judge Harold Mitchell made legal history in Courtroom 4C. 6 months, since Emma Torres' silent testimony through Biscuit had shattered precedent and rewritten the rules about how trauma survivors could tell their truths. 6 months since a little girl learned that justice, though sometimes slow, could actually arrive. Judge Mitchell sat in his chambers on a mild April morning, spring sunshine streaming through his windows, illuminating the countless case files that demanded his attention. But his focus kept drifting to the envelope that had arrived in this morning's mail. A manila package with careful, childish handwriting addressing it to the Honorable Judge Mitchell, the best judge in Chicago. He opened it with hands that trembled slightly, though he wasn't quite sure why. Inside was a letter written in purple crayon on lined notebook paper, the letters large and slightly uneven, some words clearly spelled with assistance. But it was the photograph that fell out first that stopped his breath entirely. Emma Torres smiling, not the tentative, uncertain expression he'd seen that final day in court, but a genuine, radiant, child's smile that lit up her entire face. She was standing between and Robert Williams in what appeared to be their backyard, a Happy Adoption Day banner strung behind them. Emma wore a purple dress with sunflowers on it, her hair in 2 neat braids tied with yellow ribbons. And there, sitting proudly beside her with a matching sunflower bow tied to his collar, was Biscuit, his tongue lolling in what looked unmistakably like a doggy grin. But it was Emma's hands that drew Mitchell's attention. They were held up toward the camera, and in them was an official-looking certificate. He squinted at the photo, trying to read it, when he realized there was an identical certificate in the envelope. He pulled it out carefully. Horace MANN Elementary School. 3rd Annual Spelling Bee. First place winner, Emma Williams. Emma Williams. She'd taken's name. She had a family now, a real family, complete with a new middle name honoring the woman who'd fought to keep her safe. Mitchell set down the certificate and picked up the letter, his reading glasses perched on his nose, his professional composure already cracking around the edges. Dear Judge Mitchell, my name is Emma and I won the spelling bee. I can talk now. Doctor says my brain decided it was safe to use words again because I have a real family who listens. Mom, I get to call her Mom now, says I should tell you thank you for making me safe. I still have Biscuit. He sleeps in my room every night and goes to school with me. The other kids think he's cool. My teacher, Mrs., not the police officer but a different one, says Biscuit is the best student because he never talks out of turn. That's a joke. Dogs can't talk, but I can now. I'm not scared anymore most days. Sometimes I have bad dreams about the old apartment and being hungry, but then Biscuit wakes me up and Mom comes in and we read stories until I feel better. Mom says bad dreams get smaller when you have people who love you. I think that's true. Dad, Robert, is my dad now, taught me to ride a bike without training wheels. I fell down a lot, but Biscuit ran next to me and I wasn't scared. Dad says I'm brave. No one ever said I was brave before. We have a big garden and I planted strawberries because Mom remembered they're my favorite. She remembers everything about me. Real parents remember things. I go to therapy with doctor every week still. She says I'm doing really good. I told her I want to help other kids who can't talk because of scary things that happened. She says when I'm older I can volunteer with the service dog program. I could teach other kids how to talk through dogs like Biscuit taught me. My biological father, that's what doctor says I should call, is in jail. Mom told me he can't hurt me ever again. She says he's getting help for his problems, but that doesn't mean he gets to be my dad anymore. I'm glad. A real dad doesn't leave you alone and scared. A real dad is like Robert, who makes me pancakes on Saturdays and helps with my homework even when I'm grumpy. I wanted to tell you something important. On the day in court when you let me talk through Biscuit, I thought nobody would understand. I thought grown-ups only listened to words out of mouths. But you listened different. You listened with your heart, Mom says. That's the best kind of listening. Doctor says because of what you did, other judges might let kids talk in different ways too. She says I helped change the law. That's pretty cool for a kid who used to be too scared to talk at all. I still don't talk about the bad stuff much. It's easier to pet Biscuit and feel safe than to use words sometimes. But doctor says that's okay. She says healing doesn't have a schedule. Thank you for believing me when I couldn't use regular words. Thank you for seeing that Biscuit and me were talking even when it looked different. Thank you for making me safe. Mom says you're a hero. I think she's right. Your friend, Emma Williams. P.S. Biscuit says woof. Mom says I should tell you that means thank you in dog language. Judge Mitchell removed his glasses and set them down carefully on his desk. His vision had gone blurry, not from age, but from tears he didn't bother to hide. In his empty chambers, with no one to maintain judicial composure for, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of what this letter represented. A child who'd been silenced had found her voice again. A little girl who'd learned that adults couldn't be trusted had discovered that some actually kept their promises. A traumatized 8-year-old who'd survived abandonment, neglect, and betrayal had somehow fought her way back to childhood, to spelling bees and bike rides and strawberry gardens. He thought about the appeals that had indeed been filed. Winters had challenged his ruling on Emma's testimony, exactly as predicted. The case had gone to the Illinois Appellate Court, where 3 judges reviewed his unprecedented decision to allow service dog communication as valid testimony. The legal community had watched with intense interest, some praising his innovative approach to trauma-informed justice, others criticizing what they saw as judicial overreach. The ruling had come down 3 months ago. The appellate court had upheld his decision 2-1, with the majority opinion stating. While unconventional, Judge Mitchell's allowance of canine-assisted communication meets established legal standards for alternative testimonial methods. The evidence demonstrates reliability, consistency, and clinical validity. More importantly, the communication was extensively corroborated by independent evidence. To reject such testimony solely because of its novelty would privilege form over substance and deny justice to vulnerable witnesses who cannot access traditional communication methods. The dissenting opinion worried about opening doors to unreliable evidence, but even that judge had acknowledged, Whatever one thinks of the methodology, the outcome was clearly just. Emma Torres was a child in desperate need of protection, and the evidence of her father's abuse was overwhelming. Law schools were now teaching Torres v. Torres as a case study in evolving evidentiary standards. Legal journals had published dozens of articles analyzing the decision. The ABA Journal had featured Emma's story, without using her photograph or full name, in a piece about trauma-informed courtroom practices. But more importantly, more immediately, 3 other children in Illinois had been allowed to testify using alternative communication methods in the 6 months since Emma's case. A boy with severe autism had using his tablet communication device. A teenager who'd been trafficked and developed selective mutism had been permitted to write her testimony. A 5-year-old had used anatomically correct dolls to demonstrate abuse she couldn't verbalize. Emma had opened a door, and vulnerable children were walking through it toward justice. Mitchell picked up his phone and dialed his clerk. "I need you to draft a letter for me." "Of course, Your Honor. To whom?" "To Emma Williams. I want to congratulate her on her spelling bee victory and—" He paused, his voice catching. "And tell her she's one of the bravest people I've ever met. Tell her that she didn't just save herself, she's helping save other children too. Tell her that justice is better because she found the courage to speak, even when words wouldn't come." "That's beautiful, Your Honor. I'll draft something and bring it to you for approval." After hung up, Mitchell sat for a long moment with Emma's letter in his hands, reading it again. The purple crayon, the careful spelling, the pure heart of a child who'd survived hell and somehow emerged with her capacity for hope intact. It was almost unbearable in its beauty. He thought about Torres, now serving 4 years in Correctional Center for child endangerment, neglect, and multiple counts of benefits fraud. The man had shown no remorse during his criminal trial, had blamed everyone but himself, the system, his circumstances, even Emma for being difficult. Some people, Mitchell had learned, were simply incapable of seeing their own monstrosity. But Emma hadn't let that monster define her. She'd escaped. She'd healed. She'd bloomed like those strawberries in her new garden, given proper soil, sunlight, and care. Mitchell stood and walked to his window, looking out over Chicago once more. Somewhere in this sprawling city, Emma Torres, Emma Williams now, was probably in school, Biscuit lying patiently beside her desk, her hand occasionally dropping to pet his soft fur when the world felt overwhelming. She was learning fractions, playing at recess, making friends, living the childhood that had been stolen and then miraculously returned to her. He'd wondered, that day 6 months ago, whether he was making the right decision, whether validating Emma's unique form of testimony would withstand scrutiny, whether he was letting his heart overrule his legal judgment, whether he was being a good judge or simply a man who couldn't stomach the thought of failing another child. Now, holding Emma's letter and looking at her radiant smile in the photograph, he had his answer. He'd been both, a good judge and a decent man, and sometimes in the rarest and most precious moments, those two identities aligned perfectly in service of something greater than law, greater than precedent, greater than procedure. In service of justice itself. Judge Harold Mitchell carefully placed Emma's letter in a frame on his desk, right next to his law degree and his certificate of judicial appointment. It would stay there for the rest of his career, a reminder that sometimes the most important verdicts weren't about interpreting law, they were about recognizing truth, no matter what language it spoke. And truth, he'd learned from a small girl and her golden retriever, sometimes spoke in the gentlest whispers, the most loyal hearts, and the bravest silences finally broken. Emma was safe. She was home. She was healing. And in a courtroom 6 months ago, justice hadn't just been served. It had listened, it had evolved, and it had learned to speak a new language. The language of a child who refused to be silenced forever. The language of hope. The end.